From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
What's up, everybody? We are back again for another episode of Digital Banter. We've got myself, Andy Groller, co-host James Kravick. James, how'd you do on this last weekend's NFL games? Make some money off of them?
Well, I got really lucky, actually. So I was visiting my wife's family in Massachusetts, where I guess you can't do sports gambling yet. I thought you could. I thought Barstool opened up there, but I guess you can't, which ended up paying off really, really well for me this week because, I probably would have done something with the Giants and something with the Bills, and, that wouldn't have gone over. I mean, obviously I would have bet against the Cowboys. Like that would have been the one thing that I won, but that's pretty much about it.
All right, fair enough. I'm riding high off of an Eagles win. Yeah, we'll see how that goes this week, even though the G-men weren't exactly the greatest test of strength. So
they were a great test. I think the Eagles got something. I think they got something. I don't know. 49ers, tough, very tough. We'll see if the rookie can survive.
We'll see. Go Birds. But let's dive right into today's topic. We're talking a little bit about display advertising and really kind of focusing in our conversation around, is there a future of display ads? So we're going to talk a little bit about display advertising at a top level, and then really we're going to focus a lot of our conversation around Google Display. And the reason we're going to focus on Google Display primarily is there's been a lot of chatter out there about declines in performance, declines in quality as it relates to the GDN, so the Google Display Network. And as many of our listeners probably know, either in their current roles or in their past lives, as they were getting started with different brands and things like that, Google Display is a great entry point for many brands when it comes to banner ads. It's cheap. It's got, the Google name behind it. So there's a level of trust that I think it's been built up over the course of time. And really, it's just a seamless transition as far as kind of getting into it, in addition to your search campaigns. You're running banner ads out of the same account. You don't have to worry about going to a programmatic platform. It just opens the doors for extended reach. Now, that being said, James, I think you've heard a lot of the chatter around Google Display. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of why it's today's topic?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned performance, because I think the question is about defining what performance is, and the way that we all look at performance is how it actually impacts the business, not some of the top level KPIs that I think we're used to. And I think what's going on right now is Google is, quite frankly, fooling a lot of people with some updates that have been made to the algorithm, the internet. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of different trends on the internet in general that are leading to this issue, and we'll dive into each of those. But the main thing that we're seeing across all of our clients is we're actually seeing more leads. I mean, historically, let me put it this way: I haven't put all my cards in the Google Display deck, but recently it was one of those things where like, wow, Google Display is like working pretty well. Like our retargeting campaigns are driving a lot of contacts, a lot of leads. And then you go one level deeper and you say, who are these people? And it just looks like some of the worst spam that you've ever seen. And that's like, concerning, because it does take some more experienced advertisers to go that one level deeper. And, I could certainly see agencies who don't have access to back-end data getting in, some heated conversations with their clients saying like, hey, we're driving a ton of contacts at a very low cost per contact. And then the in-house team saying like, well, they're junk. And that's what we've been seeing a lot of, which is a little scary. And I think that they're doing a lot to automate things and adding a lot of new features. And I think that those are kind of what's leading to some of the issues that we're seeing right now.
The thing that I think this topic is really important to mention as it relates to our audience around B2B brands is, while today's topic is kind of focusing on Google display advertising as a whole has historically been a huge component to anything related to paid media when it comes to B2B. You have ABM platforms, Demandbase, 6sense, Terminus that are built on the foundation of not just their analytics, but using those analytics and those targeting criteria to reach those target accounts through primarily banner ads. And the same thing can be said for the ideology around cheap impressions, supposed reach that any kind of banner advertising brings to the table. And the biggest thing here is, as you mentioned, James, it's one thing to see KPIs in the front end, great lead numbers, cheap CPMs, things like that. But does that actually drive the needle for a business? And it doesn't, especially in the B2B world where quality over quantity is the difference maker. So on the surface, it might look good, but when you dig right into it, performance isn't just suspect. It's like really questionable. And I think you bring up a good point when we were kind of planning for this podcast about how that snowballs into poor decision-making, overinvestment, and just overall kind of suspectful decision-making and optimizations that might lead you down a path that are going to ultimately be a detriment to your paid media strategy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a very perfect example of this right now is we have a client that has a good investment in Google Display and a good investment in LinkedIn ads. And honestly, we are seeing a lower cost per lead, cost per form submission, we'll call it, because it's not really a lead, on Google Display than they are on LinkedIn. But 1 out of every 50 leads that comes through LinkedIn is actually quality, where 75-80% of what's coming through LinkedIn is quality. And it's like, okay, so they're getting, it looks good on the outside. And again, without access, without going one level deeper, you might put more eggs in the display basket than you should.
And when we talk about display, we're really talking about the bigger picture of display when it comes to Google. We're talking about not just prospecting based, intent based or interest based targeting that you would be using to create awareness and hopefully, to some level generate demand within new customers. But we're also talking about retargeting. We're talking about the entire portfolio as it relates to the GDN, right,
Yeah.
James?
Yeah, I mean, retargeting is as big of a problem as display. I mean, display is tough in the B2B space because the targeting options aren't, kind of like we talked about on the last episode, the B2B targeting tools help that and are useful. And traditional display targeting within Google isn't that good. So I would still recommend that you stay away from that. But this issue is equally as bad on the retargeting side.
So do you think it's a targeting issue or is it also a placement issue? I mean, how many times have we gone through placement reports in the GDN and it's, spam upon spam upon spam?
Yeah, I mean, you can't. It's funny. One of the things that we do to optimize campaigns is exclude like the poor performing placements. Like we used to do mobile apps, and I remember going through and excluding AdSense for mobile apps, and that was like supposed to get rid of all the mobile apps. And they obviously have changed a lot of things since then because those are spammy sites that people didn't want to be on. You can't exclude your way out of that at this point. Like you so many more bad placements that there are good quality placements that. In order for it to be effective, like you actually need to create a whitelist of the placements that you want to show on, which is going to be very limiting in your reach. But there's almost no way to stay off of the spammy websites at this point. I mean, one thing that I think is a major cause to this whole thing is the launch of responsive ads. So responsive display ads. So what Google has been, I feel like this has been a Google play for forever, trying to sell their remnant inventory that nobody wants, right? Because it's fairly easy to sell the better inventory, the standard ad unit sizes, and there's a lot of weird stuff out there. So they created responsive display ads, which essentially allows Google to map any copy with any image to any ad size that you want. And I don't know if anybody has seen these ads, but they're hideous. They're like, what do they? I mean, it's like a text ad with like a little Google logo in the middle. They're just like so poorly formatted. And then you go into the results and you're like, oh, our responsive display ads are way outperforming our static ads. And I'm sorry, like if you put the static ad put together by a talented graphic designer next to one of these ads, you're like, there's no possible way that somebody would find that more engaging. And I hate to tell you, it's like not because they perfectly match the image to the headline. It's because they put this ad on some remnant crap inventory that essentially isn't like you're getting bot traffic that's going to this website that's clicking on this ad and converting, and it's just like absolute junk.
So it's funny that you say that, because I mean, was it 2 episodes ago when we were talking about tech stacks and AI? If responsive display ads are supposed to be artificially intelligent in the sense of crafting creative that matches to the audience, but is constructed in a way that engages buyers, you would think that Google, the behemoth that they are, would invest a little bit more deliberately in a better AI tool for structuring those ads, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's some of the AI creative tools are definitely way better than what they're putting together. I mean, it's just like not visually appealing. And the only reason it exists is so that they can sell remnant inventory that they wouldn't be able to sell anyways.
So you've got crap going in. What about the crap coming out when it comes to display? You talked about bot clickers, spammy websites, but what's the impact then on the flip side of that click?
Yeah, I mean, the data that you are using for targeting is a huge part of the problem too. So, and this one is not necessarily Google's fault, but with the increase in AI, that's a huge trend right now. There's a lot more bot traffic online, searching, collecting information. I mean, in Google Analytics, I'm sure everybody at this point has different ways that they exclude bot traffic. But when this is more on the retargeting side, like we need to do a better job of cleaning out that data. So, 50% of our website visits are bot traffic, and then we're including that in a retargeting audience. Then 50% of our retargeting audience is bot traffic. And we'll get into this later, but there are ways that you can easily exclude that, clean up the data a little bit, but certainly the data that you put in, having clean data is really important. And now, because of this increase in bot traffic, there's no, like, you need to clean the data before it goes in there. So B2B side, it's even harder for us, because typically we like to have like these really large retargeting lists that are 90, 180, because we have very long sales cycles. Like, my top recommendation is match your retargeting audience to your sales cycle. The longer your sales cycle is, the more crap traffic's in there, the more crap you're going to get out.
Well, I think it goes also back to what we're talking about with crap in, crap out, is what we talked about last episode with those targeting tools. Mm-hmm. If we're basing our prospecting audiences and the main drivers of traffic around interests and fuzzy affinities and demographics, ultimately we're going to be driving more traffic to the site that we're then going to be creating more unqualified retargeting pools, versus not just using LinkedIn ads as a primary driver of traffic, but ultimately those targeting tools and facilitating ways in which we have stronger quality traffic visiting the site. Whether they convert or not is irrelevant. In some cases, it's more about how do we bolster the quality of overall site traffic, and therefore, to your point, you're enhancing the ultimate retargeting pools that you're using banner ads to put ads in front of somebody for.
Yeah, and that's where like display advertising can still be effective. It's an effective reminder. It's cheap, right? So if you do have a small niche audience, direct contacts, a customer list, I say a customer list, a prospect list, like, you can reach those people at a very cost-effective rate. And that's why I think some of these ABM tools are actually doing okay. I'm not sure if I believe in a lot of the metrics that they report on, but you are able to reach the right people with the right content and at least be that constant reminder. I think that that's still going to be a valid strategy moving forward, more of like an ABM display strategy. But again, I would like to see them open up those tools to a lot more channels.
Exactly. And just at a targeting level, with them being account-based, I've always questioned the accuracy of that versus a contact level-based targeting, for sure. And to your point, the analytics of it, I've seen so many times where, there's credit being taken by a 6 Sense campaign of pipeline and rev when, the account was only shown 100 impressions. If you're telling me that a banner ad of 100 impressions drove somebody to actually create pipeline revenue, look,
I read a whole thread on this the other day of somebody in a group that I'm in asking for feedback on 6 Sense. And, ABM is what every B2B marketer is talking about for some reason. And ABM meaning like ABM tech. And 80% of the people who had experience with 6 Sense were saying that it was not helpful and that it was BS. And it doesn't have, like, the other thing is it wouldn't be if they weren't so heavily reliant on display.
Correct. And just to clear the air, most of the ABM tech stack out there has some level of integration with at least LinkedIn, others with Facebook, but it goes back to crap in, crap out. What is the accuracy and quality of the targeting that is being used to push those audience sets into those platforms and run against? That's where it comes back to it. But I digress. Let's come back and talk about all of these issues that we just kind of talked through with Google Display and kind of display it in generality. What are some of the solutions, James, that you and the team are working through to clean up quality and maybe make a difference at the end of the day as far as GDN and retargeting working a little bit stronger?
Yeah, so I'll get into some pretty specific stuff. I want to highlight a test that we have running right now across a lot of different campaigns, honestly. And on the display side, what we're testing is responsive display ads versus static display ads. So on the back end within HubSpot, Salesforce, whatever it may be, we can actually see the quality of the leads that's driven to those campaigns. So we essentially have given them different campaign codes so that we can see on the back end, we have a 50-50 split between static ads, responsive display ads. Is there a difference in quality? So hopefully I'm looking to get a better answer on, is responsive display the issue or is display in general the issue? But some of the other things, like you said, cleaning up the inputs is a huge part of it. With retargeting lists, especially GA, we've been shortening the retargeting windows a little bit, adding in the bot exclusions, making sure that that's in across the board. Usually anybody who's visited a site for less than 1 second is a bot. That's how we go about the exclusions. There are other ways, but I found that that's the most effective. But making sure that that's built into every retargeting list that's built within Google Analytics. Now, you can't do that with a Google Ads retargeting list. Google Analytics, you can. Google Analytics lists have been the way to go since they've come out. For using first-party data is another huge one. Using email lists, the B2B targeting tools, just to get out of the display standard targeting because it's not good. So that's been a big help. Seeing some changes there. Another thing, having those closed loop integrations between Google Ads and say HubSpot or Salesforce. So you're actually piping back in your MQL, SQL, sales opportunities all back into Google Ads, having that be the primary conversion that you're optimizing based off of rather than just the form submission. That's going to help the algorithm at least. We talked about the violent cycle before. So, we're getting more junk leads. The automated bidding algorithms are optimizing towards those junk leads. I actually have a really good example of this. We had a client who they do some software in the engineering space. They were getting a lot of junk display leads from job sites. We were able to take a look at the leads as they're coming through and realizing that everybody who was coming through was essentially, honestly, they weren't real people, just pretending to be looking for a job. But we noticed that the algorithm started to optimize towards job sites in general. So that we got a lot of leads from a very specific website that was then excluded. But then we started to notice that a lot of our placements were from job sites that were specific to the type of engineering that they do. So relevant placements, but still all spammy people. And it's optimizing towards job sites at this point. And it's well, that's not what we want. And it became very clear that the algorithm thought that that was performing well and continued to optimize towards it. So again, this is where having that actual quality of lead data piped back into the system helps, because you're able to say okay, well, we're actually optimizing towards sales qualified leads, marketing qualified leads, whatever you want to call them. And that's going to help fix the algorithm a little bit. But also, it does take some due diligence on our part to say, like, all of these leads are doing the same thing. They're all coming from these same sites. Like, we can exclude that stuff.
I think that's the point that I just want to come back to then and just segue it into a real quick conversation around lead gen versus demand gen. But to get to that point, you bring up a very valid point of it's great to have X amount of leads shown on some executive summary dashboard that you're passing up to the CMO of, hey, look how many leads and how cheap they were coming from our display ad efforts. But really, it's about the quality at the end of the day that drives the business forward. So, whether you're in-house or agency side, if you're just tossing up numbers on a dashboard and kind of flaunting it as a vanity metric, because that's kind of what you're mandated to do, number of leads, number of contacts, it's a losing strategy, because it's ultimately coming back to, well, if I drive 10,000 leads, but none of them convert, am I really doing a good job? Am I really driving success for the brand? Am I really driving success for our team? And I think that's a big thing to point out here, is that collaboration, that insight, and not going to just the step of delivering a lead, but going beyond that, understanding what is the lead doing, because that's how you actually move the needle forward.
Go ahead. I was going to say, for the record on this one, this is also why benchmarking doesn't work, and why, if you ask us for industry benchmarks, you're not going to get a real answer, because your customer acquisition cost should be based off of your customer lifetime value. And there's a lot of things in there that quality matters, right? So, like, yeah, our industry benchmark for what our clients get for cost per lead is $10. Like, that's not helpful. It's how many customers did you get?
So I'm going to put you on the spot, James. So you talked about using HubSpot and Salesforce, and Marketo we can throw in there as kind of a variable to understanding the quality of the leads that are coming through Google Display. So that's a lead gen mentality. What about the demand gen side of things? How do you kind of go about thinking about quality and whether you're truly generating demand or just throwing up a million impressions for some really cheap CPMs? Like, how do you go about evaluating that?
There's honestly a lot of different ways. I think it's really important to, one, make sure that you're reaching the right people. That's the most important thing. I don't think you're going to effectively manage or measure a demand gen activity if you're using fuzzy Google display targeting, right? Versus if you have an account-based list of brands that you're going after, you can easily look and track movement within those accounts, right? So, hey, we launched this display campaign against these, it could even be 1,000 target accounts. Like, okay, have we seen a movement in those target accounts? That's probably the best way to look at it. But at the same, when we talk about demand gen, it is a omni-channel approach too. Like, we don't look to break down how did display versus LinkedIn versus Google versus, like, if you start getting down into like the individual channels and not recognizing how those channels work together, you're not going to be able to effectively measure the results out of them, because it's multiple different touch points that leads to a conversion. I mean, there is like the self-reported attribution that everybody talks about. There are media mix modeling tools. I mean, attribution is part of it. Don't get me wrong. Like, view through attribution leads are part of it. Like, we don't, it's not about more contacts. It's about more quality leads. So the more awareness that we do up front, we should see more down funnel leads. So instead of gating content in a display piece, using it to be educational, pushing them to that content, having it be ungated, and then looking at down funnel, like, are we seeing an increase in demos, trials, people reaching out to contact sales? Like, you should see shorter sales cycles. I mean, there's a lot of things, but ultimately you're modeling against it more than you are saying they clicked on this ad, went to the website, filled on this form, reached out to sales, and then bought. Like, it doesn't work like that.
We talk, or at least I've said in the past, when was the last time you bought from a banner ad? I think the same question could be stated around when was the last time a banner ad actually generated demand? Because you're right. Generating demand is a multi-touch, multi-channel strategy at the end of the day. And I would love to hear Chris Walker kind of tell me when the last time he heard of a client of his or Refine Labs having somebody say Google display ad within the how did you hear about us form field. I would love to hear that. I would love to hear about anybody saying that, because that's where that kind of tactic of qualitative measurement I question. But again, I digress. Let's bring it back.
Well, I think he would echo the same things.
So let's bring it back. So let's talk about, you talked about some solutions as it relates to the GDN. Let's talk about where the GDN and Google Display as a whole is going from here. Before I give you the mic, though, I'm going to ask you two questions, and I have a joke in here. So do you see a future for Google Display? And then what strategic shifts should be considered? Now, my joke in there is, have you consulted ChatGPT yet? What has it told you is the answer to those questions?
So ChatGPT is only accurate through the year 2001, which is now 2 years ago. So I don't think anything it has to say about Google Display is necessarily relevant at this point.
Okay.
Did I look at it? Yeah, of course I looked at it. Come on, man.
All right. Go ahead. Answer the questions yourself.
So wait, what were my questions again?
Do you see a future for Google Display, and what strategic shifts should be considered within that realm?
Do I see a future for Google Display down the trajectory that they're at now? Yeah, I mean, people are still going to use Google Display. I think it's going to be kind of people who are not informed or optimizing towards things that aren't B2B. E-com, I think, is still valid. Anything that has like a shorter sales cycle where you can actually effectively measure results, I think, there's Google Display is going to stick around for a while. I think most of the investment in it is going to be retargeting. I think it's going to continue to be retargeting. I think there are going to continue to be massive brands who spend a silly amount of money and don't care what the return is that still invest in Google Display. I think a big thing to know about Google is like Google preys on, I say preys on it, but it's absolutely true. They prey on the people who don't know how to manage campaigns, right? So I don't know what the exact numbers are, but the majority of advertisers within Google Ads are small businesses and spending less than $500 a month. Think about AdWords Express for a while. And that's why they're creating more automation, less control, because now it's easy for other smaller companies to be able to just run ads, and they don't care. They just want to run ads. And eventually, yeah, they'll figure it out and they'll phase out, but churn is also part of the business. So
toss in the recommendations tab and everything else that they keep pushing that, isn't in the best interest of the end advertiser.
Yeah. And you can get 100% optimization score by ignoring their recommendations. Like, what does that tell you about their recommendations?
Right.
Somebody commented that on one of my posts recently, and I was like, that is 100% accurate. So how is it going? How is like display buying going to turn? I think that was like the next question. I think that there is going to be a shift back to the way that it used to be. I think there's going to be a shift back to direct buys. I think direct buys look a lot different than they do now, but in the B2B space, I actually see value having an ad or a sponsorship on a very niche publication, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of like search engine marketing blogs that are out there that I read, that if there was a reporting tool that had a direct buy with them, I would consider it. If it was a niche publication that I trusted and there was a sponsorship, I think it functions the exact same way as sponsoring a podcast, sponsoring an event, sponsoring a live event now. Like, I think that there's going to be more of a turn to the ability to reach those niche, smaller audiences, right? Like, the only people going to search engine land are reading or search engine journal, whatever they are. Like, there's a couple of them are there for a specific reason, and they're in a very specific audience. Like, and if I was selling a software product that was specific to these individuals, I think it makes a lot of sense.
That assumes that those buys, you can't buy through a programmatic exchange, right?
I don't think it matters. I don't think it. I think that a lot of them you can't. I think a lot of them are just direct buys, traditional outreach, but it doesn't mean that they can't. Like, I don't know. I would go as far as maybe running an ad on like Ad Age, right, which is a larger publication. But I think just being able to be specific about the placements itself is going to be the shift that's going to happen, because at least you know the majority of the traffic that's going to those sites is related to that topic. I would love to see if those publishers were able to find a way to like eliminate bot traffic. That's where I think like a direct buy that isn't a CPM or cost per click model is better, because you're saying like, hey, I'm going to pay $5,000 to be on this website, and all you care about is that your ad is on the website. You're not paying for by impression, because half of those impressions are going to be bots. That's the same problem with your retargeting list. But I do think that there's going to be a shift in that direction, and the publications are going to be part of it, like sites, banner ads, the stuff that we're talking about. But in a much larger sense, I think that we're going to see heavy growth in what I'll call direct buys with influencers, podcasts, like content that's controlled by somebody else.
The devil's advocate in me says that I understand what you're saying. I think the point you made specifically about direct buy pricing versus CPMs is relevant here, because my devil's advocate rebuttal was going to be, what about the audience first approach, where, 5,000 listeners of XYZ podcast or viewers of said influencer, only 50% of those are actually relevant to your business. So if I was the brand, I would probably be more interested in only targeting that 50% from an efficiency perspective. And if I can do that through programmatic angle, whether that's list uploads using the targeting tools we talked about last time, or account-based lists, things like that, anything to narrow down that larger audience, even if it's a small audience to begin with, just makes sense to me. But you do bring a good point up about the pricing side of things.
Yeah, and that's where I would go more around, like, again, I think that is an option. And if this stuff is like packaged together, like there are different ways, like for a lot of publications also run a conference, have a podcast, like all that stuff. And I feel like that stuff will be traditionally sold together and packaged. And I think that those packages themselves have a lot of value. Like, we listen to a lot of podcasts that are targeted towards B2B marketers. I would love to sponsor one of those podcasts. I don't think they really want to have any agency sponsors in those podcasts, but like, yeah, that would be awesome. Like a podcast listened to by a bunch of directors of demand gen who control all of the agencies that they work with. Like that would be a perfect audience for us. And honestly, like a lot of the tools that we're using and have looked at in the last couple months have come from stuff like that. So
you talk about a shift towards programmatic to eliminate bots, get a little bit more transparency. You've talked about that on a couple episodes as far as the actual costs going into media, the waste that might come into it, everything like that. And you just talked about a shift towards audio in the case of podcasts and direct buys and things like that. What other shifts do you see in that programmatic and display marketplace as it relates to channels?
Yeah, programmatic platforms like the Trade Desk, there's a couple of them out there, like they offer more flexibility in targeting. And I think a big part of what I was talking about there is you have the ability to reach more of those publications through those platforms than you do the Google Display Network. Google Display Network is also, we already talked about, has historically been known before the last 2 years for having bad inventory or being remnant inventory. Their inventory has grown a lot, but the way that media buying works is that it's the direct buys, the programmatic platforms, the Google Display Network. So it's like there's a bunch of layers that you have to go through in order to get like the prime inventory. So you have more control over that. You're better. It's more easily to layer in topical content, better audience targeting, more flexibility with first-party data, more visibility into where your ads show, more control over the creative, like responsive display isn't a thing.
The other thing too is, what are the other opportunities when it comes back to Google? You got YouTube, you've got Google Display, and you've got search, and you got Gmail and everything else that just doesn't work. When you think about it, what are the areas of opportunity of really stitching together those channels in an omni-channel strategy? They are few and far between when compared to a programmatic platform that you can effectively buy not just banner ads through, but audio, CTV, other online videos, and you are able to basically create an omni-channel strategy that uses each of those distribution channels effectively rather than in isolation. And by that, I mean somebody that watched a TV ad, you can now episodically throw in online videos. You can throw in other banner ads based off of them being exposed to the TV ad. It just opens up a lot more opportunity when it comes to creatively engaging with a buyer rather than just throwing a banner ad in front of them.
Oh yeah, creating customer journeys is like we talk a lot about how you don't want to force users through a buying process, but setting up sequential messaging campaigns in the programmatic side of things is so easy. Like you can have, I always say, like start with the big screen experience, TV. You can then bring them to the device that you want them to go through, whether it be through display, social. Like you can kind of tailor that journey, which is a very good thing to do.
James, just to kind of bring this topic on home and our episode to a close, can you give our listeners maybe 2 or 3 things that they can do today or tomorrow to kind of hone in and really kind of make their display efforts more effective?
Yeah, number one, clean up the inputs that you have going in. We talked a bit about different ways to do that. I would start looking at, if you have any sort of like persona-based targeting and not retargeting in place, I would start to look to move that towards other platforms. I would look at a programmatic platform, certainly something. And then I think just like looking at more creative ways to reinvest is another thing. I don't want to like harp on hating on Google too much because, like I said, it is cheap, but sometimes the amount of money that's coming through is better spent. And the place that you have to start is with your data and your results when it comes to like lead quality. That's going to tell you the story that you need to tell you. And if you haven't looked at it yet, I can guarantee it's probably not what you think it is. Hopefully you're already kind of up to speed with where we are and making changes.
Good points. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Like, subscribe. If you have questions, reach out to James or I. And last word, go Birds. See you, Lally. See you, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.